Hello, and welcome to Dr. Slaton Live, the brain's body, the ultimate experience. The ultimate experience is you. And what we're talking about today is brain talk. Because what are you experiencing? You're experiencing Dr. Slaton Live. And what I mean by that is that we are moving through a phase where it's not okay to not talk to protect your brain. What I'm talking about is not being afraid to say the word brain and move beyond that when you're talking to people who're supposed to be delivering a service to you, acknowledging the fact and have them acknowledge the fact that you are a brain talker. I mean, you use your brain to live, learn, think, and respond to their contact, their interaction, their cooperative participation. Because you see, when we talk about domestic violence and we talk about anger, fear, and anxiety, well, the best way to lead a person to understand those things is by knowing how to talk to your brain and act through the brain. Now, I'm talking about a dialogue that we have to have with self and other people, because we have to begin to realize that the one organ that's under attack is the brain. And so when I'm talking about brain talk, I'm talking about reflective storytelling. So when you pick up the book, that's exactly what I want you to do, is to analyze it in relation to what you're doing right now. When you look at this video, you're analyzing me and you're questioning the validity of the information flow. And that's exactly what the book is saying. So we go through the brain, the body, the senses, everything that we're talking about, you test as you move through it. So let's talk about reflective storytelling, right? So if you get into the book, it's going to talk to you about the art and science of reading, writing, drawing, acting, and performing as social academic skill sets. But now what I'm changing is the fact that you're actually reading to the brain. You're actually writing to the brain. You're actually drawing to the brain. You're actually acting to the brain. You're actually performing to the brain, because that's what you're sensing and feeling as you move through these events and activities. Because what I want you to understand is how to comprehend the experience of self, right? To go to the next level of understanding what happened, what happens, what's happening as you become more and more aware of how your sense and receive path functions. That's the brain and the body. Connecting in the flow of information through your human system, where you begin to respond differently because you're informing yourself from the inside to the outside. So you then begin to understand how it feels to care. Okay, you don't want to care. I'm not saying everybody don't want to care, but I'm saying I got to cover that in, the positive and the negative. Because when you talk about the brain deals with negative and positive energy, right? And I always reflect on the inner voice as the external context of the environmental influences trying to come in at you and change you, to program you, or you can program yourself just by not going through these events and activities with the clear mindset that says, I'm open. I just said it again, mindset. You don't want your mindset. You want your mind to be open, not set. Set is trained, right? You want it to be a processing state of mind, right? So you want it to be through the receive path, a product of the brain's mechanisms that produce or create thought with reflection, right? Because that negative influence can be you. And you can validate that when you look in the mirror or when you're out in public and other people are not drawn to you. They're moving away from you because of the way you feel. And you know it because you have a sense of who you are, right? But that's the blocking of the field. Because now, if you process that, then you modify, change, adjust, and adapt so that you become more able to be less defined by external influences because you're in control of your body and you're managing your brain. And everything about the emotions that we're talking about, pain, hurt, and sadness, are being focused. They're lifted. And so what are we talking about? Healing time is what I always say when I have this type of conversation, because what are we talking about? Brain talk. And what is brain talk? Brain talk is forward, backward, feed. I just said forward because the brain sends information forward to respond to that negative energy, your inner voice. Okay. And so when this is happening, you begin to respond differently. Why? Because you're participating in the flow of information. As you participate, right? You are moved, you shift because you become more aware. Now the decision making part kicks in. Do you want to move through these signs of care? Because if you do, you then learn how to navigate pain, hurt, and sadness, acting, acting to perform, drawing, to see what you feel like from the inside out, the brain. How do you feel? What do you write? What do you draw? How are you acting? How are you performing? Showtime. No, we're talking about entrepreneurship because to navigate today's current market, you have to know how to act through feelings of pain, hurt, and sadness. And you have to know how to control instincts driven by domestic violence. I'm saying it, mental illness. See? And it works both ways. And that's what I'm talking about. Learn self. Self is a science, right? And if you learn self, you got to talk about the brain because the brain is the core organ that allows you to live, learn, think, and respond to contact, interaction, cooperation, participation. Bam, home run. Why? Because now you done improved how you live in a home. You done improved how you learn when you go to the school or the college. You done improved how you think in a neighborhood. Hey, mall, any types of environments because your brain is on, it's in the lead of your body, right? So anything that comes at you, you are expecting to realize that forward feed, right? So your reaction is spontaneous, but the forward feed is processing of the experience. So the brain catches up. Your sense of feel for self is now informed, right? So now you're responding differently to the environment. Now, if you stop that flow, what happens? You don't get that information. You don't get to learn because you can't, because you block it. So what you learn is how to hide and ignore the fact that you have insufficient information flow because you did not process that experience. So what we talking about? You reflect on the reflection of reflecting. No, because it's forward and backward feed. And what are we talking about? You have a mind that has trained thought that has to be changed by a new thought. And that's why you want to process that so that the brain sends that forward feed and you're aware, okay, now when it happens, now you can talk about the brain because you know that your brain is functioning because you're uneasy about the changes that are occurring because hey, you different now. Oh, you are different. But that's every single experience is supposed to change you. That's how God created us. He didn't create us to just be blocks or live inside a box and be frustrated and call it communalism. No, you can still live inside the box and become an entrepreneur. And we just talking about self-science, an entrepreneur in navigating the human world, the human culture, right? Because that inevitably what you have to do, but you have to be comfortable within your own skin in order for you to accept that your brain is going to learn how to move you through that pain, hurt, and sadness because you're under attack, because you're different. Now, how many times have you recognized that you're different? And how many times have you stressed out because people treat you because you're different? And then you trying to figure out, what? It's nothing wrong with you. It's something wrong with the culture because the culture's in a program and you are more of a processor. I'm talking about in terms of thinking through the experience of self in relation to other people and the environment. Care, what I'm talking about. No, when you care, your brain is on because what are you trying to do? You're trying to learn to think and respond through the complexity of just trying to be yourself, and yourself has to evolve. So you got levels that you go through. And every level you go through, people are looking at you differently because you are expanding your sense of feel for self, other people, and the world. I said the world now because self development is endless. Self science is endless because what are you studying? Human beings. Why? Because you must understand that that is the top of the food chain. In order for you to be successful, you have to be able to interact with people. And then you think about this, you got an animal and you're treating the animal one way and human beings another way, that is a behavior crisis. Why? Because why are you doing that? Something about the transaction making you feel uncomfortable because you don't see that signs of care should be allocated and balanced so that you don't negatively influence your sense of feel for self because that's an imbalance of emotion. So now what are you doing? You're saying emotionally, I can deal with animals more than I can deal with human beings. But it doesn't work that way because you got to balance that out by accepting the negative flow of that energy and processing it so it balances out. So that when you describe, you can explain brain talk. You can explain why you have this differing opinion between being black, being white, being brown, being red, whatever. You see, because that's not what's happening. What's happening is we're all being targeted individually because we're different. I'll say it again. Because what am I talking about? I'm not changing the channel. I'm talking about brain talk. I'm talking about the value of being able to discuss the brain and the impact that these things have on you internally, and that mental illness is a part of this crisis that I'm talking you through when your sense path is damaged because of contact, negative contact at any stage. I go all the way back to the breath of life because if you impact the breath of life, it lingers. Oh, because what stops the flow of that negative experience? That's what we're talking about. Brain talk. That's why you talk about the brain, because you want to learn how to move through the crisis of self. Wow. There's no therapy for that. No, the therapy is you because you have to deal with you. And most times you're not going to let other people do but so much for you. And I'm saying turn your brain on. Talk to your brain, not your body. I mean, don't observe your body. Just because you think you're cute, you're worried about your self-esteem. Well, you deal with the brain because the brain covers your self-esteem. Learning the brain allows you to realize your real value from the inside to the outside because now you're paying attention to your responses to contact, interaction, cooperation, participation. So when someone's not cooperating with you, you automatically identify it and you don't allow yourself to get wrapped up. Okay, so then you're in a relationship and it's terrible because this person does not know how to interact. I just said it because they have no signs of cooperation. See how we just did? No, self science is self science. But you got to understand, I'm saying you protect the brain first. The body will follow the brain. You see? So we start having this conversation I'm having with you today, and we continue to have with other people. What are you doing? You're gathering more and more information about what I'm saying. Now you can check me. Why? Because this is what I do. I study human beings. I don't study animals. This didn't come from animal science. This came from 35 years of working with children, parents, community people, and taking copious notes, watching how they make contact, how they interact. Do they cooperate? What levels do they reach in terms of participation, performance, right? How many of them are fluent in sense and receive path functioning where they allow forward and backward feed to flow naturally? Now, I'm telling you, you've met these kinds of people. You know, you meet them and you're talking to them and they just cool. I mean, they're not disorganized. They seem to just be calm. And no matter what you say to them, they grounded and letting that information flow through them. And you're like, wow, you know? And then when they speak back, they are giving you an opinion, but they're telling you what that opinion is coming from. You're like, okay. And you kind of sparkle a little bit because that's unusual because they're thinking from the inside out and they're controlling and managing the body and the brain so that you can understand those signs of care that they're delivering to you. And that's what they're operating on internally is, is that is that return, those sense of feel for care for you, others in the same environment. You know, I say again, this is brain talk, and you can't reach another person. I'm talking about in crises, unless you understand how to talk to their brain and not their body. Because most times, listen to this now, most times when you're in crises, you're not going to listen to a person who is talking at you. All right. So, how do you know when they're not talking at you? Through signs of care for what? Your brain. Choosing the words, choosing how they make contact, choosing how they display anger, you see, or discontentment, disappointment. No, let's do it this way: hostility, disappointment, frustration, but they're showing it in a controlled fashion that is digestible, consumable to you because they have you in their brain, not their mind, because the mind is a trained state. That's what I'm saying. You want to be fluid. You don't want to be trained into a program response system. You want to be a processing system. So you want to understand your states of mind so that you can change and move through the crisis of self because the state of mind is fixed. Okay. And whatever happened is in that static state. And so you have to move through that static state to process the experience of self to allow you to move through the experience of other people in that situation, right? And that's recycling that negative energy into a positive flow. Why? Because when the brain gets it, the brain's moving to solve the energy problem with balance, like emotion, thought, balance, reflection, two-way, looks at the effect and the result, right? The affect, the effect, the influence, the result. It looks at all those angles simultaneously. That's what we're talking about. Processing, cognitive processing. We're talking about how the brain senses and receives information, and it doesn't move the needle unless you are participating from the inside out. I'm saying aware that you have to work with your brain. No. Who tells you this? No, you have to work with that inner sense of feel because you feel it. You feel the contact moving through you. And you know when your response is poor or blocking the actual flow of energy, action, and feelings through your human system. You know. right? And that's what I'm talking about. So when you move through signs of care, it works both ways because you're saying you only accept information from people that show you signs of care. And simultaneously, that lessens the amount of energy you have to use or waste when you don't see signs of care because you automatically know that's why I withdrew. That's why I isolated. It's very explainable. So what happened? Well, you know what happened because you're constantly processing the experience of self because that's what people don't want you to do. Process that experience of self so that you move beyond you, right? And you know where fault lies. No, it doesn't lie on you when you are the one who is being suppressed or dominated by an external influence that disregards the fact that you can say no. And they just do things because they're trying to train you to be more predictable so they can easily access the advantages of you. No, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I'm not talking smoke. I'm talking for real. Why pick up the book and go through that page one with me and just look at what I'm saying? And when you look at what I'm saying, test it. Test it. Then go through those four levels of information processing, contact, interaction. Well, three, the cooperation, the participation. Oh, and now you're able to evaluate. Why? Because are you a performer or not? Are you a performer or not? No, this is brain talk. Oh, this is literally brain talk. Why? Because what are we talking about? How do you live, learn, think, and respond to contact, interaction, cooperation, participation? How do you live in a home? How do you learn in a school? How do you think in a neighborhood? How do you respond in the workplace? No. See, now, if you teach children this, they will be less resistant in a classroom. Why? Because they know that they go there to learn how to learn. Oh, but parents, listen what I just said. Because social is what you're doing in the home, but they're learning from you. And when you send them to school, they're learning how to learn from teachers. And it continues the levels of, no, we're trying to change hypocrisy. We're trying to smooth out and structure the process for children to grow and evolve through pain, hurt, and sadness because it's all in the stage learning process loops where children constantly are hurt because of the things people say and do to them. Wait a minute. But when you're teaching a child how to live through, how to learn through, how to think through, how to respond through the experience, you're saying, look at the experience and learn from it. Look at the experience and think through it. Look at the experience and respond through it. Look at the experience and live through it. No, wait a minute. Because now, as they become more informed academically, it makes sense. The school makes sense because what are you talking about? Program process. You want to be able to process the program, literally, where you stand. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. So in a classroom where there's teasing, bullying, peer pressure, gang assimilation, okay, and your child's in there, but they know they have to process that information in relation to what? Signs of care. And they don't have to act out, or they don't have to join anything. They have to understand what the brain is doing. And then they have to figure out the hard part is they have to choose which side they're going to work on, but through levels of awareness. So they can't say, I didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing when I joined that group. Yeah, it was happening, but I didn't. No, because when we talk about gang assimilation, wait a minute, I just said it again. Gang assimilation, right? Before you know it, you're trapped. And you got a family in crisis because everybody is exposed to this contact interaction and they're trying to figure out, well, where is it coming from? Every kid comes from a neighborhood. Think about it. There you go. Home, school, neighborhood, workplace, trying to get your kid to the workplace. But as an entrepreneur in the workplace, yes, they will get a job with the intent of becoming self sufficient, and not through per se credentials, but through understanding the economy, because you're learning how to live in the community from breath of life forward. So technology and everything is already branded in the learning process because you live to learn, to think, to respond, to perform. See? And it's a continuous process cycle. So we're talking about brain talk. Why? Because if you understand the brain works 24 hours a day. That's what I'm trying to correlate when I'm talking to you, brain talk. So when I'm talking about brain talk, I want you to understand the clarity that I'm trying to speak through. That's why I'm not all over the place, but it may seem like I am. But if you pick up any one of my books, you'll see that's brain talk. He's just talking to the brain. And when I'm talking to the brain, I'm talking about sense and receive, path, function. I'm trying to let you know if I'm talking about a special needs child, I'm talking about the special needs child in relation to the sense path being blocked because the deliverer of the information is not showing the child signs of care. Therefore, the child is more resistant to accepting that information flow. And that's what has to be assessed, not a diagnostic to look at those variables over the fact that if the informer, the person sending the instruction, does not show signs of care for the proposed recipient, that the recipient functions differently, behaves differently. Why? Because they got emotion. We are emotional people, and those emotions are on the front. And if you don't show signs of care, then how do they manage the emotions that are already in the sense path? And you're sending negative energy perceptually to that child's sense path, receive path, functions. And so, whatever you are trying to get them to understand the classroom, there's fear, there's anger, and there's anxiety, locking. I'll say it again. There's fear, anxiety, and anger blocking the flow of information. Why? Because you didn't recognize the needs of that child to receive your information through signs of care. It's like you're in a classroom and you raise your hand and no one responds to you and you just keep your hand up. And then when you put your hand down, they then call on you and you're loaded with emotion, anger, fear, and anxiety. Fear because you don't know what you need to know to calm yourself down. So you stick out like a sore thumb and you know it. So what are you, because it's a social academic and they're asking you a question. Are you prepared for the question? That's fear. That's anxiety, right? And when you withdraw and isolate, that's anger because you're supposed to be able to send that forward feet and catch back up. No, that's because you're aware of what your sense and receive path functions are. So when the negative energy comes, you stay balanced and calm, like I described in the people that I've come in contact with, Eloise Johnson. No matter how I came in that classroom, no matter how upset I may have been, she just was steady and just laid it on me. Kind, care, loving, toughness, you see, that I respected because she respected the fact that I was human and that I was in crises and that I had to be talked to a special way. But she didn't just talk to me that way. She talked to everyone through signs of care. And what I learned was she was processing our responses to those signs of care. And that's what I'm talking to you about. Self-research. So that you begin to understand other people and how other people seek to upset you before you realize, and now you're in the fire, right? And so now your responses are derogatory or negative, and so you lock. What are you going to do? That's a state of mind you're entering. Are you going to stay there or are you going to shift? If you're going to shift, you got to shift through signs of care for self in relation to other people. You can't let your feelings for the other person block the flow of information through your brain. And that brain sends back that forward feed to respond through your signs of play. So you're participating in learning your brain's what's the show? The brain's body. You're learning the brain's body. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about health and wellness. I'm talking about healing. I'm talking about moving through your feeling system. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. And so we have covered the basics of today's discussion about brain talk. And I think it's so important because this whole campaign, I started it. I started actually talking about the Brains Body Showcase 2023, 24, and that's because people don't want to have this conversation. Now, wait a minute, just about the brain. You don't have to be a neuroscientist. Just study human system science. It's a natural science. You got a brain, body, and senses. Study them, okay? Understand what your body is. Understand what your senses are. Understand what your brain is, okay? Because they're not what they appear to be. No, they're much, much more. And I'm talking about entrepreneurship because as you study brain, body, and sense systems, you're learning how to live, learn, think, and respond to self. You recover you, see, through self-discovery, self-research, self-help, okay? Brains, body, learning, systems. This is what we're talking about. And that's inside the book. No, because I talk about the book because you have to have a framework that you can evaluate my discussions from, my dialogue, my approach to brain talk comes from over 30 years of just listening and observing children, parents, community. And I'm saying the crisis of self is something that impacts all of us. Because when someone upsets us, we risk not recovering from that pain, hurt, and sadness that's inflicted through the experience of that contact, that negative flow of energy. I've had enough. Wait a minute, you've had enough of what? You're blocking now. Okay, I had enough. Let's just, that's where forward feed kicks in. No, and don't be afraid but you have to understand what you're doing. You're not arguing, you're brain talking. You don't just stop. You go into brain talk, real talk, straight talk. Speak the truth, back and forth, right? And know when to stop because your brain's going to leave. Your brain's going to stop you because the brain's going to take you. You're going to be like in the zone, I'm telling you. You're going to be like in the zone. Why? Because you practice learning how to live within yourself. And because you do it through signs of care, you're constantly connected, brain, body connected. So you're aware of your body and your brain and your senses. And you are managing, controlling, and focusing the way you participate. Practice the way you practice participating. Don't be afraid. Dr. Slaton Live, thank you for tuning in. This is the example because the book show is coming, right? And the book show just allows you to have a reason to observe, listen, learn, think, and respond to Dr. Slaton Live. I could do it another way. It's in the book. Observe, listen, learn, help, and lead self.
Yeah, he sets my body in motion. He knows how to turn things up. And he knows what gets me going. Yeah, like a little text saying, hey, what's up? They look at me, I'm in a bad situation. Look at him, he's got a bad reputation. They be looking at us, thinking we are too much. Look at me, I'm in a bad situation. Look at him, he's got a bad reputation. They be looking at us. Why do I need to be good all the time?